At a recent press conference, Mayor Daley outlined new steps to address the city's growing budget deficit. Non-union personnel cost cuts and management efficiencies will save upwards of $12 million while the city continues talks with the unions about other sources of pay savings. Here are highlights from that press conference.
For many years, we have taken a long view of our budget and the economic condition. As a result, we have been able to get ahead of slowing economies. Well over a year ago, when we realized that our nation was entering into a prolonged, and I really mean much more prolonged, economic downturn that ultimately became a worldwide recession, I ordered my administration to cut back. Throughout the year, we have cut spending and improved management so that when it came to balancing our budget last November, we're able to avoid cutting services in a major way, as some cities have been forced to do, unfortunately. And I've talked to mayors, Gavin Newsom was just in yesterday, about the situation in San Francisco. We've been in contact with mayors from not only the larger cities, but the medium-sized cities and smaller cities. It's having a huge economic concern and real budget crisis for everyone. We've been able to maintain the number of police and fire officers at existing levels, even as other cities were cutting their forces, unfortunately. We're able to continue investing in our neighborhoods improvements, even as other cities were cutting and, unfortunately, eliminating many of their public projects, unfortunately. Still, the nation's economy has worsened further this year, and I believe it's going to get deeper and deeper, and it's going to be much more longer, unfortunately, for all of us. This is much more serious. Even though some experts always see a glimmer of hope, and everybody wants a glimmer of hope. I don't care who you are, you want to see that. But it's much more substantial, this recession, dealing with all levels of disciplines in both public and private ventures. Everything that we see has been affected, and that's really unusual because other recessions were not like that. Many believe that the economy will get worse before it gets better, and unfortunately, they have many layoffs and much more significant layoffs, both in major companies, medium-sized and smaller cities. And then you don't look at people getting hired, and that really concerns everyone as we move into the summer months, and then we look forward quickly to the fall. That the recession could last for another few more years, and when someone declares at the end, that be the intro, how do they end it? Then you have to figure out what happens after that. Is we're going to see then more hiring of people in the private sector, and that is the key: is the private sector, is hiring in the private sector. As we predicted, the city of Chicago has experienced slow revenues, and Gene will talk about much more significantly for each month of the year beyond what was projected last year. To date, our revenue deficit has grown to $96 million in the first 4 months of 2009. And Gene Saffel, the Chief Financial Officer, will provide further details about that just in a few minutes. But because we anticipated a revenue slowdown, and we've acted responsibly and already cut spending by another $31 million. I want to make it clear we will continue to take needed steps to manage our way month by month through these very difficult times, and it's going to last much longer. Still, we expect that a revenue deficit will continue to grow, and it could total more than $250 million to $300 million by the end of the fiscal year of December. And that is very significant. As we look to the future, we'll focus on two goals. First of all, you have to balance your budget, and then you have to try to move Chicago forward in this serious economic times. I want to remind everyone that personnel costs comprise more than 80% of the corporate budget. 80% of the corporate budget is personnel costs. And 90% of all employees are represented by unions, rightfully so. They negotiated and they got contracts. As we cautioned many times before, we cannot get through these tough times and expect to balance our budget this year. And I'm not trying to be a doomsday person. I'm just telling you the facts. And for the next several years, without the cooperation and support of all the unions and all the employees in government serving the city. And that's why months ago I instructed my staff to sit down with each of the unions to discuss how we can work together to reach concessions regards to the employees, because no one likes to see any employees laid off because they have families, they have homes and everything else, and help take the burden off the Chicago taxpayers, because the taxpayers are truly suffering in America. I mean, I don't care where you go. I don't care if it's a corporation. I don't care if it's individuals. Everybody's in the same boat, and it's a big boat, and it's getting bigger and bigger. Well, I understand that this is not an easy process. It's not. We're working towards an agreement, and I'm increasing confident, and we've had great discussions and great working relationship with the unions, and I think they're understanding more than anything else, because in the private sector, many of their members are laid off, multiplying, being laid off, unfortunately. And I believe we can come together and agree on a final set of concessions that will help the city and will help all the people that work on behalf of the city to keep the city moving forward. As a demonstration to the people of Chicago and our union leaders, the situation is serious and that we must act today. We want to announce that at City Hall we're doing our part to address the revenue shortfall. First of all, I'm proposing a number of salary-saving measures from the 3,600 non-union workers. This will include more unpaid days for me and my staff, department heads, other non-union management administrative staff. First, we'll make 6 of the remaining holidays scheduled for 2009 unpaid. Next, we'll call for 7 mandatory unpaid furlough days. There will be an addition to 3 city shutdown days already announced last year. We will award compensatory time instead of time of pay for overtime. That would save us an enormous amount of money. Finally, we will increase the cap on health care contributions for non-union employees. The combination of unpaid holidays, furlough days, and government shutdown days result in a roughly 6% decrease in annual salary for non-union employees, a reduction of about 10% of the remaining of the year. These steps will result in $10 million in additional savings for the rest of the fiscal year, helping to bring down the deficit, and every penny helps. But obviously, that's not enough. We've asked the coalition of unions serving the city to make the same concessions for their employees or think about other concessions. We're in discussions with the police and fire unions about financial terms of their contracts, which is really important. We wouldn't ask the unions to do anything that management and other non-union employees wouldn't be prepared to do or haven't already done. If we're here to protect the taxpayers in the years ahead, we need everybody's cooperation, and this is not a one-man show. The sooner we reach an agreement, the greater the savings will accumulate this year. We're also announcing today that another series of management efficiencies will save about $2.6 million this year. That includes an additional $2 million in unemployment insurance savings we earned by working with our unions to reduce the number of layoffs last year without adversely affecting the corporate fund. We'll see another $600,000 in saved from traffic control reductions and telecommunication savings. Some may ask why we're taking these personnel-related steps and not using all the reserve funds for the lease of the Skyway and our parking meters to pay out way out of the problem. The idea shows a basic misunderstanding of city finances. First, the 2000 budget includes the use of $100 million in reserves, $100 million from the parking meter and midway transaction. Next, we must hold a substantial portion of these funds reserved to protect the city's strong bond ratings. The city of Chicago has the highest bond rating we've had in more than 30 years, which is contrary to many, many cities across the country and states who have seen their ratings fall drastically during this economic crisis. It is responsible management. It protects the taxpayers because we're able to borrow at lower interest rates. Further, we expect our financial problems to continue for the next few years, our deficits to be far more than we had available in all these funds, and that is the most frightening aspect of it. We haven't ruled out using more of these funds to balance our budget, but it would be irresponsible to put that solution ahead of better management of government, given the size of the deficit we're facing down the road. And you can't do it now because you have to look at the end of the year. Lastly, I'd like to further address how we'll use the $126 million termination agreement for the Midway Airport agreement that we received last month. Even though we weren't able to close a lease with the people because of the economic condition in the markets, to ensure the city's budget would not be impacted by the termination, we propose to allocate $40 million to help balance the budget. This is the same amount that we had planned to allocate if the agreement had gone through. In addition, we used $33 million for the debt service this year and next, so we can invest to improve our infrastructure, including our menu program for this year. Why is this important? Given the infrastructure funding we're receiving from the federal government and hopefully more from the Springfield. Because of our menu money goes directly towards neighborhood streets, alleys, sidewalks, lighting improvements that make a difference in people's lives. Where the money that comes from the state and federal government, it's much more structured in what you can use it for. And that's why there's more flexibility in the menu money. These are costs that are not covered by either the state or federal programs. We cannot take that money and use state and federal money for these purposes in communities. And that's why the menu is so important. Even with these additional funds from the Midway lease, state and federal governments, a slowing economy and the reduction in traditional city revenue still forces us to address the basic structure challenge and budget our personnel costs, and that is the key. Again, we hope that the unions will join us in our efforts to reduce the costs and address our growing revenue shortfalls. At the end of the day, we must get a better handle on the cost of personnel. I don't care where you are, and you know that more in your industry as well. Every business and every government in the nation is facing the same challenge. In fact, many cities across the country are experiencing enormous fiscal crisis that are forcing them to make drastic cuts in personnel and, unfortunately, in basic services. New York faces a $4 billion shortfall in fiscal 2010, and that's what they predict. They plan to eliminate about 13,000 jobs, 2,500 police and fire, on top of 3,000 additional layoffs. They're also raising property sales and hotel tax. Los Angeles is facing 2,800 people layoffs in the next budget, considering following our lead by leasing the operation of the parking garages and meters. And they have to find out if there's really a market out there. That's the interesting thing. San Francisco, the same way, cut back, and they've done a lot of things, layoffs. They cut back and reduction of people's salaries and all that, negotiating with all the unions. We're not alone and challenge our unions to work together with us on behalf of the people they serve. In fact, cities like Boston and San Francisco have proposed one-year wage freeze for all city employees. So we're looking at everything that's happening across the country. With the steps we've taken today, we're acting wisely, responsibly to address our city's financial challenges. We hope that the coalition unions will so join us in our efforts to reduce costs and shrink our budget deficit. And they've been working very closely. And we have maybe 20 or 25. So each one of them, we talked individually and collectively. And so far, the conversation is very good. It's not it's not understanding the problem, and I think that's so far we feel very good about that in the sense that they're all willing to really understand because they know what's happening in the private sector as well. And now I'd like to ask Gene Saffel to make a brief update on our current revenue shortfall. Gene?
Thank you. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Thank you, Mayor Daley. I will make it brief. I'm going to go through a quick overview of how the nation's recession continues to have a negative impact on the city's revenues. Even with our ongoing efforts to reduce costs, revenues are coming in at lower than expected levels, so the city's revenue shortfall continues to grow. Revenue collections in key areas have fallen short by an additional $13.2 million since we reported on them last month, increasing the city's total revenue shortfall to $96 million since the budget was approved last fall. As you will recall, we announced a series of cost-cutting and debt reduction steps earlier this year to reduce the corporate fund budget gap by more than $31 million. And with the nearly $13 million in savings from the new measures announced today, the current actual budget gap is still approximately $52 million. In April, the real estate transaction tax continued to fall far below projections. At $4.7 million, it missed the budgeted estimates of $10.6 million by $6 million. The year-to-date collections are now nearly $23 million below projections, and they are $35.2 million below the same period last year. Even though we built into our 2009 projections a 24% decline from 2008 levels, we have experienced an actual decline of more than 68%. Now, recent reports by state and national realtors associations indicate signs the market may be hitting bottom, and that there's an upward trend in the forecast in median home prices. But as the mayor said, that's just a glimmer of hope and not something that we really think we can hang our hats on or build future expectations around. Recovery is still expected to be gradual, real estate sales activity below prior years, and the impact of foreclosed property potentially dampening any gains. Sales taxes also continue to come in below projections, with January results, which were distributed to the city in April, falling below estimates by $3.5 million. The January 2009 sales activity declined by 8.9% compared to the same period last year, and reports indicate that these conditions will persist in the months ahead. Another key factor is income tax collections, which continued to slide throughout the end of the first quarter of 2009. At $22.5 million, March income tax revenues were nearly $3 million below our projections. The national unemployment rate for March was 8.5%, and the Illinois statewide unemployment rate was 9.1%, its highest level in 23 years. Some forecasters anticipate that a return to peak employment locally will not occur until as late as 2012. Finally, utility and cigarette taxes declined slightly in the last month from projections. We are closely monitoring our financial position to ensure that we are doing all we can to protect taxpayers, and we plan to continue these revenue updates on a regular basis throughout the year. Thank you very much.